What if the habit that steals your peace is so normal that you call it being responsible? Most people think explaining themselves brings understanding. But what if every extra reason quietly gives away a little more freedom? Ancient Taoist wisdom points to a truth that feels almost impossible at first. The more you try to control how others see you, the farther you drift from yourself. Once you notice this hidden pattern, you may never speak the same way again. And it often begins with something so ordinary that almost everyone misses it. There is a habit so ordinary that most of us never notice it. It slips into conversations, messages, quiet moments with family, even the stories we tell strangers. We explain ourselves. We explain why we left the job that no longer felt right, why we are still single, why we chose a different path, why we stayed silent, why we finally said no. Sometimes we even explain why we are happy, as if peace itself requires permission. The strange part is that these explanations often appear before a single question is asked. We begin answering invisible doubts that may not even exist. A simple decision becomes a careful defense. A personal choice becomes a case presented before an unseen court. We speak as though someone is waiting to challenge us, and without realizing it, we become both the accused and the one trying to prove innocence. It rarely feels dramatic. It happens in ordinary moments. Someone asks how life is going, and before sharing anything genuine, we soften the edges. We add reasons. We provide context. We reassure them that our choices make sense. The words arrive almost automatically, polished by years of repetition. They leave our mouths so naturally that we mistake the habit for honesty. Yet something curious happens afterward. Instead of feeling understood, we often feel strangely tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally lighter in the wrong way. As though another small piece of ourselves has been handed over for inspection. The conversation ends, but our minds continue replaying it. Did we explain enough? Did they understand? Should we have said more? The moment has passed, but we remain trapped inside it. This quiet exhaustion has become so familiar that many people no longer recognize it. They simply accept it as the price of living among others. They believe every important choice must come with an explanation detailed enough to satisfy every possible opinion. Without noticing, life becomes less about living and more about translating every decision into something that cannot be questioned. Perhaps you have felt this without giving it a name. You decide to spend a weekend alone and immediately you find yourself listing reasons. You decline an invitation, and before the silence can settle, you rush to justify it. You choose a career that feels meaningful instead of impressive, and suddenly you are preparing answers for conversations that have not even happened. Somewhere along the way, your own certainty stopped feeling enough. Modern life quietly encourages this pattern. We are surrounded by places where every choice invites commentary. Opinions arrive instantly. Approval is measured publicly. Disagreement travels farther than understanding. In such a world, explaining ourselves begins to feel less like a choice and more like a form of protection. We learn to anticipate judgment before it appears. We build explanations the way people once built walls, hoping they will keep discomfort outside. But walls have an unexpected cost. The more carefully they are built, the less freely we move within them. There is another layer that often escapes attention. Explaining ourselves is not always about sharing information. Sometimes it is an attempt to control how we exist inside another person's mind. We want them to see us correctly. We want our motives understood, our intentions accepted, our decisions interpreted with kindness. It sounds reasonable because, in many ways, it is deeply human. The difficulty begins when this desire quietly grows into a need. Once that happens, Every misunderstanding feels dangerous. Every raised eyebrow becomes a problem to solve. Every pause in conversation invites another explanation. Instead of allowing people to have their own thoughts, we rush to reshape those thoughts before they fully form. We become caretakers of other people's comfort while forgetting to protect our own peace. The irony is almost invisible. The harder we work to make ourselves understandable, the more distant we often feel from ourselves. Our attention turns outward. We become experts at reading reactions, guessing expectations, adjusting words. Meanwhile, the quiet voice that once knew exactly why we made a choice begins to fade beneath the noise of constant interpretation. Ancient Taoist wisdom observed something remarkable about human nature. It noticed that struggle often disguises itself as effort that appears completely reasonable. A person believes they are solving a problem, while in truth they are feeding it. The river never argues with the rocks it passes. It does not pause to explain why it flows this way instead of another. It simply continues, and in that quiet persistence, it remains entirely itself. Most of us live differently. We stop at every stone. We defend every turn. We spend precious energy convincing others that the current of our life has the right to exist. Over time, we become so occupied with explaining the direction of the river that we barely notice whether it still feels like our own. And perhaps that is why this habit is so difficult to recognize. It hides beneath politeness. It disguises itself as maturity, kindness, openness, even good communication. Yet beneath every unnecessary explanation, there may be a quieter question we rarely allow ourselves to hear. What are we afraid would happen if someone simply misunderstood us? That question lingers long after the conversation ends, because the deepest burden may have little to do with what other people believe, and everything to do with what we quietly fear their misunderstanding might reveal within ourselves. The question lingers because it reaches beneath the words we speak. If misunderstanding feels so threatening, perhaps the real burden was never the explanation itself. Perhaps it is the quiet fear that gives birth to it. Few people remember learning this fear because it rarely arrives all at once. It forms slowly, almost invisibly. A child brings home a decision and is asked, "Why did you do that?" They answer. The answer is judged. They explain again. A feeling begins to settle deep inside. Being yourself is not enough. You must also make yourself acceptable. Years pass, and the lesson grows with you. In school, the student who thinks differently learns to defend unusual ideas. At work, every decision is expected to come with reasons that satisfy everyone involved. Within families, even the smallest choices can become subjects of debate. Why didn't you visit? Why don't you want children? Why are you leaving? Why are you staying? Why can't you simply do what everyone else does? Eventually, the questions no longer need to be spoken. They become internal. Before anyone has the chance to doubt you, you begin doubting whether your own choice can stand on its own. This is how an invisible habit becomes part of identity. The mind starts believing that acceptance depends on explanation. Love feels safer when understood. Respect seems easier to earn when every decision appears reasonable. Even kindness begins to feel conditional, as though it might disappear the moment another person cannot follow your reasoning. Without realizing it, you stop living from the center of yourself and begin living from the imagined perspective of everyone around you. Notice how subtle this becomes. You buy something because it brings you quiet joy, yet almost immediately you think about how to justify the expense. You decide to rest instead of staying busy, and your first instinct is to explain that you have been working hard lately. You choose distance from someone who constantly drains your peace. But instead of honoring that feeling, You spend days constructing an argument that proves your decision was fair. The explanation is rarely for them. It is an attempt to calm the part of yourself that fears losing approval. This fear wears many faces. Sometimes it appears as the fear of rejection. Sometimes it disguises itself as politeness. At other times it calls itself responsibility or maturity. Yet beneath each version lies the same quiet hope. If I can explain myself well enough, perhaps I will remain safe in your eyes. There is nothing weak about this hope. It is deeply human. We are social beings. Long before cities, technology, or written language, survival depended on belonging. To be separated from the group often meant danger. Somewhere within us, traces of that ancient memory still remain. Our nervous system sometimes reacts to misunderstanding as though it were far more serious than it truly is. A simple disagreement begins to feel like exclusion. A raised eyebrow feels heavier than it should. Silence after sharing an important decision can seem almost unbearable. The mind rushes in, desperate to repair what may never have been broken. So we explain again. Then we explain the explanation. And if someone still disagrees, we search for better words, convinced that the next sentence will finally secure the acceptance we have been chasing all along. Yet acceptance built this way is remarkably fragile. It depends on something we cannot control. Another person's interpretation, their mood, their experiences, their beliefs, their fears. We hand them the responsibility of deciding whether our life makes sense, then wait anxiously for a verdict that may never arrive. This creates a strange kind of captivity. Outwardly, we appear free to make our own choices. Inwardly, every choice still waits for emotional permission. Not official permission, not legal permission. Something far quieter. Permission to exist without disappointing someone else's. Expectations, many lives become smaller in this way. People stay in careers they have already outgrown because leaving would require too many explanations. They remain in relationships that no longer bring peace because ending them might invite judgment. They hide dreams that feel deeply alive because those dreams cannot be easily defended in ordinary conversation. Little by little, the fear of being misunderstood becomes stronger than the desire to be authentic. This is why constant explanation can feel like armor. Armor is meant to protect. It helps us survive difficult moments, but no one is meant to wear armor every hour of every day. Eventually, its weight changes the way we move. It limits freedom long after the danger has passed. Emotional armor works in much the same way. Each explanation seems harmless by itself. Together, they become a shell, safe enough to prevent criticism perhaps, but also thick enough to separate us from the quiet confidence that asks for nothing in return. There is a profound difference between expressing the truth and defending it. One flows naturally. The other is driven by fear. From the outside, the words may sound almost identical. Only the heart knows the difference. The ancient Taoists observed this difference with remarkable clarity. They noticed that the deepest strength rarely announced itself. It did not hurry to convince, argue, or justify. It remained rooted in something that existed before approval and survived misunderstanding. To many people, this way of living appeared almost mysterious. Not because it rejected others, but because it no longer depended on being constantly confirmed. By them, it offered the possibility that a person could move through the world without carrying the exhausting burden of proving that their life deserved to be exactly as it was. There is something quietly unsettling about the way the world exists, not because it is mysterious, but because it never seems interested in proving itself. The morning arrives without announcing why it deserves to come. Rain does not explain why it falls on one field instead of another. A river bends around stone without apologizing for changing direction. Even the oldest tree in the forest does not spend its seasons defending the shape of its branches. It simply grows according to its nature. For thousands of years, Taoist wisdom invited people to notice what had always been in front of them, not as poetry, not as religion, as reality. The Tao was never described as something that demanded belief. It was the quiet movement beneath all things, the unseen order through which life unfolded. It did not argue because it had no need to convince anyone that it existed. It revealed itself through its own presence. The more carefully you observe nature, the stranger human behavior begins to appear. A mountain remains unmoved whether someone admires it or ignores it. The ocean does not become smaller because a traveler misunderstands its tides. The moon never shines more brightly to satisfy those who doubt its light. Everything fulfills its purpose without seeking agreement. Yet human beings often live in the opposite direction. We hesitate before making simple choices because we imagine the reactions they might create. We rehearse conversations before they happen. We prepare explanations for decisions that already feel true inside us. Instead of allowing life to unfold, we pause again and again, hoping someone else will confirm that we are moving correctly. It is an exhausting way to exist. Perhaps that is why Taoist thought speaks so often through images of water. Water has no interest in appearing important. It does not force its path. It does not compete with the rocks that stand before it. It simply continues, yielding where resistance is unnecessary and persisting where movement is possible. Over time, what seemed soft reshapes what once appeared unbreakable. Its strength never depends on persuasion. There is a quiet lesson hidden there. The deepest forms of confidence are rarely loud. They do not rush to explain themselves because they are not searching for confirmation. Like water, they move according to what they are, not according to what others expect them to become. This does not mean silence is always wise. There are moments when explanation is an act of kindness. Love sometimes asks us to speak clearly. Responsibility often requires honest communication. Taoism never suggests withdrawing from the world or refusing to express ourselves. The difference lies somewhere much deeper. One explanation flows naturally from clarity. The other rises from anxiety. From the outside, the words may sound almost identical. Inside, they come from entirely different places. Imagine two people making the same decision to leave a career that no longer reflects who they are. One calmly shares the reasons because someone sincerely wishes to understand. The other keeps talking long after the explanation is complete, adding detail after detail, trying to erase every possible doubt from another person's mind. The conversation is no longer about information. It has become a search for emotional safety. That search has no natural ending, no explanation can guarantee that everyone will agree. No carefully chosen sentence can completely control another person's interpretation. There will always be someone who misunderstands, someone who judges, someone who sees only a fragment of the story. Nature never struggles with this impossibility. It never asks every observer to see the same beauty. The rose blooms whether it is praised or ignored. Autumn arrives even for those who wish it were still summer. The wind carries fallen leaves without wondering if anyone approves of its direction. There is an effortless dignity in such existence. The Taoists called this Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action. Yet the idea reaches beyond doing less. It points toward living without the unnecessary struggle created by constant resistance. Action still happens. Decisions are still made. Words are still spoken. but they emerge from alignment rather than fear. When a person acts this way, something subtle changes. Life no longer feels like a performance that must be continuously explained. Identity becomes less dependent on being correctly interpreted. Peace begins to come from remaining faithful to what is true rather than successful at convincing others that it is true. This can seem almost impossible in a world built around opinions. Every day we are encouraged to present ourselves, defend ourselves, define ourselves. We are told that visibility creates value and that every choice should come with a public explanation. Gradually, we begin confusing authenticity with successful persuasion, but they are not the same. Authenticity is quiet enough to survive. Misunderstanding persuasion depends upon avoiding it. The distance between those two ways of living is far greater than it first appears. If the river stopped flowing each time someone questioned its direction, it would never reach the sea. If the sun paused every morning to justify another sunrise, daylight would never arrive. The natural world reminds us, again and again, that existence does not become more meaningful because it is constantly defended. Perhaps human life follows the same forgotten pattern. Perhaps certainty does not grow by collecting better explanations. Perhaps it grows each time we no longer feel compelled to protect what is already genuine. And this reveals something unexpected. The explanations we repeat so tirelessly may never have been intended for other people at all. The audience we have been trying hardest to convince may have been the restless voice within ourselves. The part that still believes our life cannot simply be lived until it has first been approved. Once you begin to notice that restless inner voice, another pattern quietly comes into view. It is not satisfied with one explanation. It always asks for another. You explain a decision. Someone looks uncertain, so you clarify. Their expression still feels unreadable, so you add more detail. A new misunderstanding appears and you rush to correct it. Then another question follows, and before long you are defending something that never needed a defense in the first place. The conversation may last only a few minutes. The emotional effort can linger for days. Most people believe this happens because they have not found the right words yet. They assume there must be a perfect explanation waiting somewhere, one so complete that every doubt disappears and every opinion finally settles into agreement. But that moment never arrives, not because you failed to explain well enough, because no explanation has the power to enter another person's mind exactly as you intended. Every human being hears your words through a different life. Their memories shape them. Their fears reshape them. Their values color them. Two people can listen to the same sentence and walk away carrying entirely different meanings. It has always been this way, yet the ego quietly refuses to accept. It not the loud ego that seeks attention, the quieter one, the fragile identity that longs to be seen correctly. It whispers that if someone misunderstands you, then something important has been lost. It convinces you that peace depends on repairing every mistaken impression. So you keep working. You adjust your language. You soften your opinions. You remove anything that might create discomfort. You become increasingly skilled at managing perceptions while becoming increasingly distant from yourself. There is a hidden cost to living this way. You stop asking whether your choices are true. Instead, you ask whether they will be accepted. That single shift changes everything. A decision no longer belongs entirely to you. Before it can exist, it must first pass through an invisible audience. Friends, family, colleagues, strangers, sometimes people who will never even know your name. Their imagined reactions begin influencing your life long before any real conversation takes place. This is emotional labor that almost no one talks about, not the work of solving problems, the work of constantly managing how you appear inside other people's thoughts. It is impossible to measure, yet countless hours disappear into it. Entire evenings are spent replaying conversations. Sleepless nights are filled with imaginary arguments. The mind edits yesterday and rehearses tomorrow, searching endlessly for words that will finally guarantee understanding. But there is no guarantee. Someone may still disagree. Someone may still judge. Someone may still create a story about you that has almost nothing to do with who you really are. The mind finds this deeply uncomfortable because it wants certainty. It wants the reassuring belief that enough effort can control the outcome. That if you become careful enough, thoughtful enough, articulate enough, misunderstanding will simply disappear. Life has never worked that way. Think about the people you know best, even after years together. There are moments when they misunderstand you. Not because they lack intelligence or kindness, but because no two people ever experience reality in exactly the same way. If complete understanding cannot exist between those who love each other, how could it possibly exist with everyone else? This realization can feel disappointing at first. Then something unexpected begins to happen. The burden starts becoming lighter. When you stop expecting perfect understanding, you also stop demanding impossible performances from yourself. You no longer have to craft flawless explanations for every decision. You no longer have to eliminate every possible misunderstanding before it appears. The endless trial finally begins to lose its power. For many people, life has quietly become a courtroom. Every conversation feels like testimony. Every decision becomes evidence. Every silence is treated as suspicious. Every mistake requires a defense. And somewhere within, an invisible judge waits for a verdict that never seems final. Even after being accepted today, the trial begins again tomorrow. Another explanation, another clarification, another attempt to secure a certainty that slips away the moment someone new enters the room. This is how fragile identity keeps itself alive. It survives by convincing you that one more explanation will finally bring lasting peace. But lasting peace cannot grow from something. That depends entirely on changing minds you do not control. That is why the cycle never ends. Explain, clarify, correct, defend, then explain once more. The circle feeds itself because its true purpose is not communication. It is protection. It protects an identity that fears it cannot remain whole unless everyone sees it the same way. The quiet irony is that the more fiercely you protect this identity, the more fragile it becomes. A single critical comment can shake it. A misunderstood message can disturb an entire day. An unexpected opinion from a stranger can linger in the mind far longer than it deserves. Strength built upon other people's perceptions can never feel secure because those perceptions are always changing. Clouds move across the sky without asking permission. Seasons arrive without consulting anyone's preferences. The world itself offers no promise that every observer will understand what they see. Yet it continues without hesitation. Perhaps there is wisdom in that. Perhaps peace does not require controlling every interpretation. Perhaps freedom begins the moment you recognize that another person's opinion is not a place where your identity has to live. If that is true, then confidence cannot simply mean believing in yourself more strongly. It must be something quieter. Something that no longer depends on winning invisible arguments or earning unanimous approval, and that kind of confidence changes the meaning of silence itself. Silence is no longer the absence of a defense. It becomes the presence of something far more stable, something that does not weaken simply because another person chooses not to understand. There is a kind of strength that rarely attracts attention. It does not arrive with perfect speeches or clever arguments. It does not need to dominate a conversation or leave everyone impressed. In fact, many people overlook it completely because they have been taught to associate confidence with volume, certainty with persuasion, and influence with visibility. Yet some of the strongest people you will ever meet move through life almost unnoticed. They listen more than they speak. They answer without rushing. They disagree without becoming defensive. When they make a decision, they do not seem burdened by the need to convince everyone around them that it was the right one. There is something quietly different about them, not because they know more than anyone else, because they are no longer negotiating with themselves. You can often feel this long before you understand it. Imagine sitting across from someone who has chosen an unexpected path. Perhaps they left a successful career to live more simply. Perhaps they ended a relationship that looked perfect from the outside. Perhaps they decided not to follow expectations that everyone assumed they would embrace. You ask why. They answer honestly, then they stop. There is no flood of extra explanations. No nervous laughter filling empty space. No desperate search for approval hiding inside carefully chosen words. They allow the silence to remain exactly where it belongs. Strangely, that silence often says more than another 5 minutes of explanation ever could. It speaks of a decision that has already found peace within the person who made it. Most of us have experienced the opposite as well. Someone insists over that they are happy, successful, or completely unaffected. Every sentence tries to prove something. Every story reinforces the same image. The words become louder, but the certainty somehow feels smaller. The harder confidence struggles to convince others, the less convincing it becomes. Quiet confidence behaves differently. It has no urgent need to advertise itself because it is not asking for confirmation. This is one of the gentlest insights found within Taoist. Wisdom, the deepest reality, rarely announces itself. The roots of a great tree grow in darkness. The current beneath a calm river cannot be seen from the surface. The earth turns through space without making a sound. Some of the greatest forces in existence accomplish everything while demanding almost no attention at all. Human beings are not separate from this pattern. The most grounded person in a room is often not the one speaking the most. It is the one who remains unchanged whether others agree or disagree. Their center of gravity exists somewhere deeper than public opinion. That does not mean they never explain themselves. They simply know the difference between sharing and proving. When someone genuinely wishes to understand, they speak with openness. When another person is determined to misunderstand, they recognize that endless explanation cannot create willingness where none exists. There is remarkable peace in recognizing that distinction. It saves enormous amounts of emotional energy. Think about how many conversations continue long after understanding has become impossible. Not because either person is searching for truth, but because each hopes that one more sentence will finally change the other's perception. Sometimes it happens, often it does not. The quiet person understands that not every disagreement is waiting to be solved. Some differences simply belong to life. They can be acknowledged without becoming battles that consume the heart. This kind of presence can seem mysterious in a world that constantly rewards performance. We are encouraged to present ourselves, explain ourselves, defend ourselves, and build carefully crafted identities for others to admire. Over time, it becomes easy to believe that our value depends on how successfully We manage those identities, but presence cannot be manufactured. It appears naturally when there is less distance between what you are and what you show. That is why integrity carries such quiet power. Integrity is not perfection. It is the absence of unnecessary division. Your words and your actions no longer compete with each other. Your choices no longer require elaborate stories to make them acceptable. You stop creating one version of yourself for strangers, another for family, and another for your own private thoughts. Life becomes simpler, not because circumstances become easier, but because you are no longer carrying so many versions of yourself at once. People notice this, even if they cannot explain why. They feel calmer around those who are internally settled. There is less tension in the conversation because nothing is being forced. Nothing is being sold. Nothing is quietly asking for approval. Presence itself becomes reassuring. Perhaps this is why silence has always held a special place in Taoist thought. Silence is often misunderstood as avoidance or weakness. Many assume that if someone stops defending themselves, they must have surrendered. Yet there is another kind of silence that emerges only after the need to prove has faded. It is not empty. It is complete. It leaves room for others to think what they will without treating every opinion as a personal emergency. It trusts that what is genuine does not become false simply because someone fails to recognize it. This silence is not built on indifference. It is built on freedom. Freedom from the exhausting responsibility of controlling every impression. Freedom from carrying every misunderstanding as though it were a personal failure. Freedom from believing that your peace depends on another person's agreement. When that freedom begins to appear, something remarkable changes. You stop measuring confidence by how convincingly someone speaks. You begin measuring it by how peacefully they remain when no explanation is needed at all. And perhaps that is the quiet strength most people spend their lives searching for without realizing it has never been hidden inside louder words. It has always been waiting in the space where the need to justify finally comes to rest, and silence is no longer something to fear, but something spacious enough to call home. Something begins to change the moment you stop treating every misunderstanding as a problem that must be solved. At first, the change is almost too small to notice. The urge to explain still appears, but it no longer takes complete control. You feel it rise within you, asking for one more sentence, one more reason, one more attempt to make everything perfectly clear. Yet instead of following it automatically, you allow a brief pause. Inside that pause, a different possibility quietly appears. You realize that not every silence needs to be filled. Not every opinion deserves an answer. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Life becomes surprisingly lighter through these small moments alone. Someone questions your decision to leave a career that looked successful from the outside. Before, you might have listed every reason, every sleepless night, every quiet disappointment that led you there. You hoped that if they understood your journey, they would finally approve of your choice. Now you simply say that it was the right path for you. Some people understand, others do not. For the first time, neither outcome changes the truth. Or perhaps you begin setting boundaries with someone who has always expected unlimited access to your time and energy. They ask why you have changed. They suggest you have become distant or selfish. The old habit immediately searches for explanations detailed enough to erase their disappointment. But some disappointments cannot be erased. They can only be accepted. You speak honestly, without trying to control what happens next. If they understand, you are grateful. If they do not, your peace no longer disappears with their approval. That quiet shift changes far more than a single conversation. It changes the relationship you have with your own life. The same thing happens when your path begins moving away from those around you. Friends remain where they have always been, while something inside you quietly asks for a different direction. Perhaps your interests change. Your priorities become simpler. The goals that once seemed essential no longer hold the same weight. Some people celebrate your growth. Others become confused by it. You cannot carry both your future and everyone's expectations at the same time. Eventually, one of them must become heavier than the other. Many people spend years trying to keep both balanced. They continue explaining every new step, hoping no relationship will feel uncomfortable, no expectation will be challenged, no misunderstanding will remain unresolved. It is an impossible task. Growth almost always creates distance before it creates understanding. This is not because people are unkind. It is because each person is walking through life at their own pace, seeing through their own experiences. They can only understand your transformation from where they are standing, not from where you have arrived. Once you truly accept this, something remarkable happens. Your energy returns. The hours once spent rehearsing conversations become available for living. The attention once devoted to managing impressions begins noticing the present moment again. You stop performing your life and begin participating in it. There is a quiet courage in that, not the courage that seeks recognition. The courage to let your actions speak long enough for time to become your witness. Time has a way of revealing truths that arguments never can. A person who lives with kindness does not need to announce it every day. A life shaped by integrity slowly becomes visible without demanding attention. Someone who consistently acts with honesty eventually creates a reputation that no carefully crafted explanation could ever produce. Truth has its own patience. It does not hurry because it knows that reality unfolds slowly. This is why actions grow stronger as explanations become fewer. Not because words lose their value, but because words are no longer carrying the entire weight of identity. Your life begins carrying it. Instead, there will still be criticism. Someone will misunderstand your intentions. Another person will reduce your story to a single moment. Others may hold opinions based on fragments they have never questioned. None of this completely disappears. What disappears is the feeling that you must chase every misunderstanding until it becomes agreement. That chase was always more exhausting than the misunderstanding itself. There is an unexpected peace in allowing people to hold incomplete pictures of you. After all, no one has ever seen your entire life. They have not lived your quiet mornings, your private struggles, your moments of doubt, your slow awakenings, or the invisible choices that shaped the person you became. They know only what they have witnessed, and even that is filtered through their own. Expecting everyone to fully know you was never a realistic hope. Perhaps they were never meant to. The people who truly belong in your life will gradually come to understand what matters most. Not because you endlessly defend yourself, but because they experience your character over time. They see how you respond when life becomes difficult. They notice the consistency between your words and your actions. They begin trusting the person rather than the explanation. And for those who never understand, there is a different kind of peace, not satisfaction, acceptance. Acceptance that another person's perception cannot define a life they have not lived. This is where quiet courage matures into freedom. You stop asking your life to convince everyone that it is valid. You simply live it, day after day, choice after choice, without unnecessary performance, without endless defense, without carrying the impossible burden of universal approval. In time, something beautiful happens. The questions that once demanded long explanations begin answering themselves, not through arguments, not through persuasion, but through the unmistakable evidence of a life lived honestly, where the deepest truths are no longer spoken first. They are revealed patiently and unmistakably by the way you choose to exist. There comes a quiet moment that is difficult to recognize while it is happening. Nothing dramatic changes. The world does not suddenly become more understanding. People do not stop asking questions. Opinions continue to form. Assumptions continue to appear. Someone still misunderstands your intentions. Someone else still believes they know your story after hearing only a small part of it. Outwardly, life looks almost exactly the same, yet inwardly, something has become remarkably still. The familiar urge to explain is no longer the voice guiding every decision. It still appears from time to time, shaped by years of habit, but it no longer feels like a command that must be obeyed. You notice it, and then you notice something, even quieter beneath it, a simple certainty. Not certainty that everyone will agree with you, certainty. That agreement is no longer required before you can continue. Walking your own path, this is not the silence of withdrawal. It is not refusing to communicate or pretending that other people no longer matter. Human connection still asks for honesty. Love still asks for openness. Trust is still built through sincere conversation. What disappears is something much heavier. The need to continuously translate yourself into a version that feels acceptable to every person you meet. There is an enormous difference between sharing your heart and performing your identity. One invites connection, the other quietly asks for permission to exist. When those two are no longer confused, life begins to move with unexpected ease. You discover that integrity is not something you prove. It is something you live. Your values no longer exist only in the explanations you give. They appear in the choices you make when no one is watching. Your character is no longer measured by how convincingly you speak about it, but by the quiet consistency that slowly shapes every ordinary day. This is what inner alignment feels like. Your actions no longer pull in one direction while your fears pull in another. Your words no longer struggle to protect an identity that your life itself cannot support. Little by little, the distance between who you are and how you live begins to disappear. And when that distance disappears, so does much of the need to defend yourself. There is something deeply peaceful about living a life that does not depend on witnesses. Not because you reject other people, because your deepest relationship is no longer with their approval. It is with your own conscience. The ancient Taoists understood that harmony begins there. A river does not search for applause as it reaches the sea. A seed does not ask the forest whether it deserves to become a tree. The seasons do not delay themselves until every living creature agrees that change is appropriate. Life trusts its own unfolding. Perhaps we were always meant to do the same, not with arrogance, not with stubbornness, but with the quiet humility of recognizing that no human being can fully see another from the inside. Every person meets only fragments of your life. They encounter moments, conversations, decisions, and memories woven together according to their own understanding. Expecting complete understanding was always asking another person to carry something no one truly can. When that expectation gently falls away, relationships often become lighter instead of weaker. You listen more carefully because you are no longer preparing your defense. You speak more honestly because your words are not trying to manage another person's conclusions. You become more present because your attention is no longer divided between living your life and constantly explaining it. Ironically, this is often when people begin to understand you more deeply. Not because your explanations become better, because your life becomes clearer consistency. Has a language that arguments can never imitate. Kindness repeated over years speaks for itself. Integrity practiced in ordinary moments needs no advertisement. A peaceful heart quietly influences others without demanding recognition. The life itself begins saying what words never fully could. Perhaps this was always the deeper meaning hidden beneath Taoist wisdom. It was never an invitation to speak less simply for the sake of silence. It was an invitation to depend less on being understood. Those are not the same thing. One is about reducing words. The other is about releasing fear. When fear loosens its grip, silence is no longer uncomfortable. Speech is no longer defensive. Both become natural expressions of the same inward steadiness. There comes a moment when nothing changes on the outside. People still misunderstand. Opinions still exist. Questions still come, but something inside has become immovable. You no longer live to correct every perception. You no longer spend your energy translating yourself into versions others will accept. Like water finding its course, your life quietly becomes its own explanation, and perhaps that is what the ancient Taoists understood all along. The truest life is never the one that is defended the most. It is the one that no longer needs defending.